The morning of my surgery, everything seemed normal. David kissed me goodbye in the pre-op room, his familiar scent of sandalwood and coffee providing comfort, as the nurses prepped me for the procedure that would remove the tumor wrapped around my spine. 6 hours of delicate surgery that would determine whether I'd walk again, or worse. "I've got everything handled," he assured me, squeezing my hand. "Just focus on healing." After 15 years of marriage, I trusted him completely. David had always managed our finances meticulously. Investments, retirement accounts, our joint savings from my work as a physical therapist and his as an IT consultant. When he'd insisted on getting power of attorney before my surgery, just in case of complications, it had seemed like typical David, cautious, prepared, responsible. I'd signed without hesitation. Now, as the anesthesiologist injected something into my IV that made the ceiling swim, David's face blurred above me. His last words followed me into unconsciousness. "Love you, Sarah. Everything's going to be fine." When I woke in recovery, groggy and disoriented, my first clear thought was gratitude, that I could feel my toes. The surgeon appeared at my bedside, explaining that they'd successfully removed the entire tumor. Recovery would be long and painful, but the prognosis was excellent. "Where's David?" I asked, my voice sandpaper rough. The surgeon exchanged glances with a nurse. "Your husband stepped out a while ago. I'm sure he'll be back soon." But David didn't return that evening, or the next morning. My calls went straight to voicemail. By the second day post-surgery, worry had eclipsed the pain of my incision. My sister Jen arrived from Chicago, her face tight with concern. "Have you heard anything?" "Nothing," I whispered. "Something must have happened to him. An accident, maybe? Can you call the police?" Jen hesitated, then pulled a chair close to my bed. "Sarah, there's something you need to know. I didn't want to tell you right after surgery, but—" "Just tell me," I interrupted, ice crystallizing in my stomach. "I got a call from Mark at the bank yesterday. He was trying to reach you." Jen took my hand. "There was a large transfer from your joint accounts. Actually, all your joint accounts. Mark flagged it because it was unusual activity." "How large?" The room seemed to tilt sideways. "All of it, Sarah. Your savings, retirement, everything. Almost $742,000. The monitor beside my bed beeped as my heart rate spiked. "That's impossible. Where would it go? David would never—" The transfer was to an account belonging to someone named Veronica Lawson. The name hit me like physical blow. Veronica, David's co-worker who'd started at his company 8 months ago. Attractive, single, 15 years younger than his 45. He'd mentioned her frequently at first, then stopped altogether when I'd teased him about his work crush. "There must be a mistake," I insisted, though even as the words left my mouth, pieces were clicking into terrible place. David's recent late nights, the business trip to Boston that had seemed unnecessary. The password changes on his phone. Mark froze the accounts as soon as he saw the transfer, Jen continued. "But Sarah, David used the power of attorney you signed. He came into the bank the morning of your surgery, right after he left you." I closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing. The tumor removal suddenly seemed secondary to this new, unexpected surgery. The abrupt excision of my husband from my life, taking with him our financial security and 15 years of trust. "Has anyone—" I swallowed hard. "Has anyone gone to the house?" Jen's silence answered before her words did. "I went by this morning. Most of his clothes are gone, his passport too. Of course, the practical preparations of a man who'd planned his exit meticulously, just like he'd planned our finances, or so I'd thought." "The police?" I asked numbly. "They took a report, but said it's complicated because you signed the power of attorney. And technically, he had legal access to those joint accounts." I stared at the ceiling, my surgical pain now competing with a deeper anguish. David hadn't just left me. He'd calculated his departure to coincide with the moment of my greatest vulnerability. Had he been planning this all along? Was anything about our marriage real? "There's one more thing," Jen said, squeezing my hand. "Mark wants to meet with you as soon as you're well enough. He said there might be something he can do." It was the smallest spark of possibility in the darkness that had suddenly engulfed my life. What could a bank manager possibly do about a husband who'd legally, if unethically, emptied our accounts? I didn't know. But in that moment of devastating betrayal, even the faintest hope felt like oxygen to a drowning woman. "Tell him I'll meet as soon as I'm discharged," I said, turning my face toward the window so Jen wouldn't see my tears. Outside, life continued normally. People walking, cars passing, clouds drifting across the spring sky. How strange that the world didn't acknowledge that everything had changed. My body was healing from one surgery while my life was hemorrhaging from another. And somewhere out there, the man I'd trusted with both my heart and finances was starting a new life with a woman named Veronica, funded by 15 years of our shared dreams. As the nurse came in to check my vitals, I made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 4 days after my world imploded, I was discharged from the hospital with a back brace, prescription pain medication, and the crushing weight of betrayal. Jen insisted I stay with her rather than return to the empty house David and I had shared. "We need to meet with Mark today," she said, as she helped me settle onto her couch. "He's been calling daily for updates on your condition." Mark Tanner had been our bank manager at First Regional for nearly a decade. Unlike most banking relationships in this digital age, ours was personal. Holiday cards exchanged, occasional dinners with his wife Lisa, genuine interest in each other's lives beyond transactions. David had sometimes complained that Mark was too old-fashioned, preferring to handle matters in person rather than online. Now I saw that old-fashioned quality in a new light. "He said he could come here," Jen added, "considering your condition." 2 hours later, Mark arrived, his normally cheerful face solemn as he took in my surgical brace, and the evident shock still etched on my features. He carried a briefcase and a potted orchid. "I'm so sorry about everything, Sarah," he said, setting the flower on the coffee table. "Both your health situation and the other matter. Just tell me if there's anything you can do," I replied, skipping the pleasantries. "Jen said you thought there might be options." Mark settled into an armchair, placing his briefcase across his knees. "Yes, there are several things to discuss." He extracted a folder of documents. "First, I should explain exactly what happened with your accounts." He spread several papers on the coffee table within my view. Banking records, transaction receipts, account statements. "On the morning of your surgery, at 8:47 a.m., David entered our main branch and presented the power of attorney document. He requested a series of transfers from your joint accounts, as well as your individual retirement account, to which the POA gave him access. The precision of the timestamp made me flinch. I'd been on the operating table by then, completely vulnerable, while David had been systematically dismantling our financial life. "Amanda Chen was the teller who processed the initial request," Mark continued. "When she saw the size of the transfers, she flagged it for review and called me. This is standard procedure for transactions over certain amounts. But you approved." "It?" I said flatly. "It wasn't a question." Mark's expression tightened. "I questioned David about the transfers. He explained that he was consolidating your accounts into a new high-yield opportunity that required immediate funding, especially with medical expenses looming. The power of attorney was properly executed, notarized, and on file with us. Legally, my hands appeared tied." "Appeared?" Jen caught the nuance immediately. Mark nodded. "I've known you and David for 10 years. Something felt wrong about the urgency and the comprehensive nature of the withdrawals. So, while I did authorize the transfers, I had to, Given the documentation, I placed a 72-hour administrative hold on the receiving account. Hope flickered faintly. What does that mean exactly? It means that while the funds left your accounts, they've been frozen in the receiving account, Veronica Lawson's account, for a 3-day review period. This is a provision we can invoke for unusual large transfers as a fraud prevention measure. Breath caught. So the money hasn't actually gone anywhere yet? Correct. Ms. Lawson can see the deposit in her account, but cannot access or move the funds until the hold expires. Mark checked his watch, which would be tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The room suddenly seemed brighter, oxygen flowing more freely into my lungs. Can you extend the hold? Not without cause. But that brings me to my second point. Mark extracted another document from his briefcase. Our fraud department discovered something interesting about the power of attorney document. David presented. He handed me a copy of the POA I'd signed. It looked identical to what I remembered, my signature clear at the bottom, the notarization stamp in the corner. Look at the date of powers activation, Mark directed. I scanned the legal jargon until I found it. These powers shall take effect immediately upon the incapacitation of the principal as determined by... My voice trailed off as understanding dawned. The POA you signed was a springing power of attorney, Mark explained. It only became effective if you were declared incapacitated, unable to make your own financial decisions due to your medical condition. But Sarah, despite your surgery, you were never legally declared incapacitated. Jen leaned forward. So he didn't actually have authority to make those transfers? Precisely. Mark's expression was grim but satisfied. David misrepresented the status of the POA when he initiated the transfers. That constitutes bank fraud. The implications washed over me in a dizzying wave. So you can reverse the transfers? Get the money back? With your authorization, yes. I brought the paperwork to initiate that process. He slid several forms toward me. We'll need to file fraud charges as well. I stared at the documents, emotions colliding in my chest. Filing fraud charges meant formally acknowledging David's betrayal, crystallizing into legal records what still felt surreally nightmarish. It meant accepting that my husband had not only abandoned me during a life-threatening medical crisis, but had attempted to steal our life savings in the process. There's something else you should know, Mark added, his voice gentler. After flagging this situation, I took the liberty of checking if David had accessed your safe deposit box. My heart sank. The safe deposit box contained our most precious possessions, family jewelry, including my grandmother's antique diamond ring, birth certificates, property deeds, and an emergency cash reserve of $25,000. He cleaned it out 2 days before your surgery, Mark confirmed. Everything except the property deeds, which he couldn't easily liquidate. The calculated nature of David's betrayal took my breath away. This was no impulsive decision, no heat-of-the-moment life crisis. He had methodically planned each step, timing it precisely around my surgery, preparing his escape for weeks, if not months. If we file the fraud charges, Jen asked, what happens to David? Mark's expression hardened. Bank fraud is a federal offense. It carries significant penalties, including potential prison time. At minimum, it would create an investigative trail that could help recover any assets he's already taken, like the contents of the safe deposit box. Prison. The thought of David, who complained about the discomfort of economy airline seats and insisted on specific thread counts for our bedsheets, in a prison cell should have brought some satisfaction. Instead, it only deepened my shock. How had I missed the true nature of the man I'd shared my life with? You'll need to decide quickly, Mark urged gently. The administrative hold expires tomorrow morning. Once those funds are released to Ms. Lawson's access, recovering them becomes much more complicated. I reached for the forms with a trembling hand. This single signature would not only reclaim my financial future, but would set in motion a legal machinery that would forever change the ending of the story of David and Sarah Mitchell. 15 years of marriage would conclude not with divorce papers, but with fraud charges. "Do you have a pen?" I asked Mark, my voice steadier than I expected. As I signed my name, I realized David had miscalculated in one critical way. He'd assumed my incapacitation would be complete: physical, mental, and emotional. He'd underestimated both my resilience and the human connections I'd formed while he'd apparently been plotting his exit. Mark gathered the signed documents carefully. "I'll file these immediately. The funds should be restored to a new secure account in your name only by tomorrow afternoon." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more deeply than those simple words could convey. "But there's still one thing I don't understand. Why did you go to such lengths to help me? You could have simply followed protocol." Mark closed his briefcase before answering. 3 years ago, my sister went through something similar. Her husband emptied their accounts while she was battling cancer. Her bank didn't question it. She lost everything. He met my eyes directly. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to anyone else if I could help it. As he left, I felt the first stirring of something beyond shock and betrayal, a reminder that while one relationship had revealed itself to be a devastating facade, other connections, even those I'd considered peripheral, contained surprising depths of humanity. The money would be returned. But the harder recovery of my trust, my confidence, my belief in my own judgment was only beginning. "Your Honor," Meredith began, "we would like to submit evidence regarding Mrs. Matthews's financial holdings, which have been independently maintained throughout the marriage." Judge Harwood nodded, and the bailiff collected the documents from Meredith to distribute to the judge and opposing counsel. I watched Richard's face carefully as Marcus received the paperwork. At first, he appeared merely curious, then confused as he began scanning the pages. "As you can see," Meredith continued, "Mrs. Matthews has maintained substantial business interests under her maiden name, Elizabeth Winters, throughout the duration of the marriage. These interests include multiple real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and, most notably, majority ownership of Winters Holdings LLC, which acquired controlling interest in Caldwell & Associates law firm 9 years ago." The courtroom fell silent. Marcus froze, his finger hovering over the page he'd been reading. Slowly, he turned to look at Richard, whose expression had transformed from confusion to disbelief. "That's impossible," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Slightly." He looked at me, then back at the documents. "This must be some kind of mistake." "There's no mistake, Mr. Matthews," Meredith replied calmly. "The documentation is quite clear. Through a series of investment vehicles and holding companies, Mrs. Matthews has owned 62% of Caldwell & Associates for the past 9 years. She has been essentially your employer throughout your partnership at the firm." Richard's face drained of color. "Elizabeth?" he said, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Is this true?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Richard, it's true." Judge Harwood cleared her throat, clearly recognizing the significance of this revelation. "Mr. Weber, were you aware of this arrangement?" Marcus, who had been flipping frantically through the documents, looked up with a carefully composed expression. "No, Your Honor. This information was not disclosed to the partnership." "It was disclosed to the board of directors of the parent company," Meredith countered smoothly. "As legally required, the structure of ownership was never hidden. It simply wasn't advertised to the daily operations team." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This changes everything," he said, turning to Marcus. "We need to regroup." "Sit down, Mr. Matthews," Judge Harwood ordered firmly. "We're in the middle of proceedings." Richard reluctantly returned to his seat, but I could see the panic setting in. Everything he thought he knew, about me, about his position, about this divorce, had just been upended. "Your Honor," Meredith continued. In light of this information, we believe Mr. Matthews's claim that his career was the primary contributor to the couple's wealth is demonstrably false. In fact, Mrs. Matthews' business acumen and investments have far outpaced his earnings during their marriage. Judge Harwood studied the documents carefully. These are significant revelations, Mrs. Matthews. Why weren't these assets disclosed in the initial financial declarations? They were disclosed in my personal financial statement, Your Honor, I replied. The business holdings are listed under separate documentation as required by law. My counsel can provide the complete filing trail if needed. Home tomorrow. Not to stay yet, but to get some things. See what else he took. Jen looked concerned. Are you sure you're ready for that? No, I admitted. But I need to start somewhere. That evening, as Jen prepared dinner, my phone rang again. David's mother's name flashing on the screen. My heart lurched. David had kept his mother's phone after she passed 2 years ago, unable to disconnect that final link. I'd found it sentimental. Then, now it seemed like yet another calculated tool. I answered on speaker so Jen could hear. Sarah. David's voice, simultaneously achingly familiar and now strangely foreign. Don't hang up. Please. I said nothing, my throat constricting. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But there's more to this than you understand. His voice had that persuasive tone he'd used in countless minor disagreements over the years. The voice that gently suggested I might not have all the facts, that his perspective was the more rational one. You took everything while I was in surgery. I finally managed, each word precise and contained. What exactly am I misunderstanding? I needed to protect our assets. There are people after me. Dangerous people. I had to move quickly, create distance. Jen and I exchanged incredulous glances. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was descending into farce. Dangerous people, I repeated flatly. Related to your IT consulting work? Or to Veronica? A pause. You know about Veronica. I know you bought 2 tickets to Cancun. I know you emptied our safe deposit box. I know you calculated exactly when I'd be unconscious and unable to stop your transfers. My voice grew steadier with each fact. What I don't know is how long you've been planning this. Sarah, listen. The bank reversed the transfers, David. The silence on the other end was deeply satisfying. Every dollar. And the police are looking for you. Bank fraud during a medical emergency doesn't play well with authorities. His breathing changed, faster and shallow. You involved the police? Sarah, you don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. You committed fraud. You abandoned me during life-threatening surgery. You stole from me. I can explain everything, he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. Not over the phone. I need to see you. Tomorrow, at the house. Just you. No police, no sister. Warning. Bells rang in my mind. Why would I ever agree to that? Because I have your grandmother's ring. And your mother's locket. Things I know matter to you beyond their monetary value. His voice hardened slightly. Things you'll never see again unless you meet me. Alone. The naked manipulation stunned me. This was a side of David I'd never witnessed. Calculating, cold, willing to weaponize 15 years of intimate knowledge about what I valued most. 3 o'clock, I said finally. That's all you get. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking. You're not seriously considering meeting him alone, Jen said immediately. Of course not. I reached for my phone again. I'm calling Detective Larson. David just made their job much easier by announcing exactly where he'll be tomorrow. As I relayed the conversation to the detective, who promised to coordinate an arrest plan, I found myself wondering about David's claim of dangerous people. It seemed like an obvious lie, a desperate attempt to justify his actions. Yet something in his voice had carried genuine fear. Was it merely the fear of consequences finally catching up to him? Or was there something more to this bizarre situation than a midlife affair and financial theft? I'd find out tomorrow, I realized. One way or another, I would come face to face with the stranger who had been my husband, and perhaps finally understand how 15 years of shared life could evaporate. During 6 hours of surgery, standing in the driveway of what had been our home just a week earlier, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The familiar craftsman-style house with its slate blue paint and white trim appeared unchanged, oblivious to the seismic shifts in its occupant's reality. "Remember the plan," Detective Larson said from the unmarked car where she sat with her partner. "We have officers positioned at all exit points. Let him come to you in the front room. Keep him talking. If you feel unsafe at any point, use the A code word headache and we'll enter immediately." I nodded, adjusting my back brace beneath my loose sweater. The surgical pain had subsided to a dull throb under medication, but the brace was non-negotiable for at least another 3 weeks. And, "The wire?" I confirmed, touching the small transmitter clipped inside my sweater pocket. "Working perfectly. We'll hear everything." She handed me the new house key the locksmith had provided. "Good luck, Mrs. Mitchell." "Just Sarah," I corrected automatically. The Mrs. Mitchell identity felt like a costume I'd unwittingly worn in someone else's play. Walking up the familiar path to my front door required more courage than I'd anticipated. Not because of David or potential danger, but because crossing that threshold meant confronting the physical space where my marriage had lived and died. Inside, the house was unnervingly normal. The same furniture, artwork, even the coffee mug David had left in the sink the morning of my surgery. I moved to the living room as instructed, taking a seat that gave me clear sightlines to both the front door and the kitchen entrance. At precisely 3 o'clock, I heard a key in the back door. David still had his copy, of course. Footsteps. Approached through the kitchen, and then he appeared in the doorway. My first thought was that he looked terrible. The always impeccable David appeared rumpled and exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes, his normally close-trimmed beard showing several days' growth. He wore jeans and a wrinkled button-down I didn't recognize. "Sarah," he said, relief evident in his voice. "You came alone?" "As requested." I kept my expression neutral, fighting the surreal dissonance of this encounter. 1 week ago, this man had been my husband, my partner, my future. Now he was essentially a stranger, and according to the authorities, a criminal. He stepped further into the room but maintained distance, perching on the arm of the sofa rather than approaching me. Directly, his eyes tracked over my body, lingering on where he knew the surgical brace would be. "How are you feeling? After the surgery?" The genuine concern in his voice was jarring given the circumstances. "They got the entire tumor. I'll need physical therapy, but the prognosis is good." He nodded, eyes dropping to his hands. "I'm glad. That's really good news." The absurdity of this exchange, his professed concern for my health while having abandoned me during surgery, fueled a sudden surge of anger. "Where's my grandmother's ring, David? And my mother's locket? You said you had them." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Here. I never intended to keep these. I know what they mean to you." He placed the pouch on the coffee table and slid it toward me. I didn't reach for it immediately, wary of any closer contact. "Why David?" The question encompassed everything. The theft, Veronica, his disappearance during my most vulnerable moment. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's complicated. Try me. I think I've earned an explanation." His eyes met mine, then darted away. "I made some mistakes. Bad investments. Debts I couldn't tell you about." "How much?" I asked. He swallowed visibly. "Almost $300,000. The figure jolted me. "How is that possible? I monitor our credit cards, our accounts. Not under my name." His voice dropped. I have another identity, another social security number. It started as a protection measure for cybersecurity work, but then you used it to hide debts from me, I finished, the betrayal expanding into new territories. What kind of debts? It started with an investment opportunity. High risk, high reward. My colleague Victor brought me in. We lost everything, but the investors weren't traditional lenders. Understanding dawned. Loan sharks? Seriously? He nodded miserably. They started threatening me 3 months ago. Then they mentioned you, described your routines, where you went for coffee, which patients you saw on Tuesdays. It was a clear message. And your solution was to steal our life savings rather than come to me? Or go to the police? My voice rose despite my intention to remain calm. These aren't people the police can easily touch, he insisted. And I couldn't put you at risk by telling you. The plan was to pay them off, disappear for a while until things cooled down, then reach out once you'd recovered from surgery. It sounded rehearsed, a convenient narrative to justify unconscionable actions. But something still didn't add up. And Veronica? Where does she fit into this protection plan? His expression shifted, guilt flickering across his features. She works in cybersecurity. She helped create the extraction plan, new identities, untraceable fund movements. Don't lie to me, David. Not now. The tickets to Cancun weren't about hiding from loan sharks. He looked away. It became complicated. We got close while planning the exit strategy. How close? I pressed, needing to hear him say it. We've been seeing each other for about 4 months, he admitted. It wasn't planned. It just happened. 4 months. The timeline aligned perfectly with my diagnosis, the discovery of the tumor, the increasing anxiety about my health and future. While I'd been grappling with my mortality, my husband had been finding comfort elsewhere. So let me understand clearly, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You got into debt with dangerous lenders. Instead of coming to me, you started an affair with a woman who helped you plan to steal our life savings. You executed this plan while I was in surgery, then fled with her to Mexico. But now you're back because the money never arrived, he said simply. The transfer to Veronica's account showed as pending, then disappeared entirely. She panicked, thought I'd double-crossed her, and left me at the Cancun airport. Despite everything, a bubble of laughter escaped me. The absurd image of David abandoned in Mexico by his partner in crime after my financial murder had failed. His expression darkened. It's not funny, Sarah. These people have already come looking for me. When they realize I can't pay them? Then turn yourself in, I suggested. Protective custody, witness protection if these people are as dangerous as you claim. It's not that simple. There are complications. Like bank fraud charges, I suggested. Or abandoning your wife during emergency surgery. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know how it looks. But I swear, Sarah, everything I did was to protect us both. The money was just a temporary measure until the situation resolved. Temporary, I repeated incredulously. You emptied every account we had. Because leaving anything would have created a trail. His composure cracked slightly. These people are connected, with access to banking information. Any transfers between our known accounts would have been flagged. It had to be all or nothing to create the illusion we'd disappeared completely. His explanation had a certain twisted logic, but years of marriage had taught me David's tells when he wasn't sharing the whole truth. The slight clench in his jaw, the too deliberate eye contact, he was still withholding something significant. Who exactly did you borrow from, David? What aren't you telling me? Before he could answer, the unmistakable sound of a car braking hard came from outside. David's head snapped toward the window, panic replacing the calculated control he'd been maintaining. Did you call the police? He demanded, moving quickly to peek through the curtains. Damn it, Sarah, I told you to come alone. Did you really expect me to meet privately with the man who cleaned out our accounts and abandoned me during surgery? I countered, rising carefully from my chair. Of course I called the police. His face transformed with a cold fury I'd never witnessed in 15 years together. You have no idea what you've done. Rapid footsteps approached the front door, but they weren't the measured pace of Detective Larson and her partner. The door burst open with a splintering crack as the jamb gave way. Two men I'd never seen before entered, one tall and angular, the other stocky with a shaved head. Both wore dark clothing and impassive expressions that chilled me more than overt. Menace would have. Mitchell, the taller one acknowledged David with a slight nod. We've been looking for you. David's face had drained of color. Alexei, I can explain everything. There was a banking complication, but I'm resolving it. The man called Alexei surveyed the room, his gaze calculating as it landed on me. Is this the wife? The one with the convenient surgery? The casual reference to my medical crisis made my blood run cold. These men knew about my surgery, had factored it into whatever arrangement they had with David. She's not involved, David said quickly. This is between us. On the contrary, Alexei replied, his accent faintly Eastern European. She became involved the moment you used her medical situation as your opportunity. Rather cold, don't you? Think? An understanding crashed over me with sickening clarity. David hadn't been trying to protect me from loan sharks. He'd been working with them, using my surgery as the perfect cover for a massive financial theft, with or without their direct involvement. I instinctively reached for my pocket, ready to use the code word that would bring in the police waiting. Outside. But before I could speak, a third figure appeared in the doorway behind the intruders. Detective Larson, gun drawn. Police! Hands where I can see them! What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The stocky man pivoted with surprising speed, reaching inside his jacket. Detective Larson fired a single shot. The man crumpled to the floor as his partner raised his hands. David lunged toward me. Whether to protect me or use me as a shield, I'll never know. Additional officers flooded in from both entrances, securing Alexei while checking his fallen companion. Detective Larson approached me, her weapon still drawn but now pointed downward. Are you hurt, Sarah? I shook my head mutely, shock rendering me temporarily speechless. Across the room, David was being handcuffed by another officer, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. Sarah, he called desperately as they began to lead him out. It wasn't what you think. I can explain everything. Sarah, please. As they guided him past me toward the door, I found my voice. One question, David. Just one. Was any of it real? Us? Our marriage? 15 years together? He met my eyes for a long moment before answering. Parts of it. More than you'd believe right now. Then he was gone, escorted to a waiting police car alongside Alexei. The stocky man was being attended to by paramedics, alive but wounded. Detective Larson guided me to sit down, recognizing the signs of shock. It's over now. You're safe. But as I watched the activity swirling around what had once been my peaceful living room, I knew this was far from over. David's cryptic parting words, the mysterious men, the web of deceptions stretching back months, or possibly years, all of it suggested that this was merely the first chapter in a story far more complex than a simple case of marital betrayal and theft. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police statements, crime scene technicians, and the surreal experience of watching my home become evidence in multiple criminal investigations. Detective Larson arranged for me to stay at a hotel, rather than return to Jen's apartment, concerned that if David's associates had known my routines, they might know my sister's address as well. We're still piecing things together, she explained as we sat in the hotel restaurant the morning after the confrontation. But certain aspects are becoming clearer. She opened a folder, careful to angle it away from other diners. Inside was a photo of the man called Alexei. Alexei Volkov, Russian national with connections to a sophisticated cybercrime organization. On our radar for years, but elusive. Your husband appears to have been working with him for at least 18 months. The timeline caught me off guard. 18 months? That's well before my diagnosis. Before any of this started. Detective Larson nodded. We believe your husband's involvement began as legitimate cybersecurity consulting, helping them shore up vulnerabilities in their own systems, but evolved into something deeper. The financial transactions we've uncovered suggest he crossed ethical lines approximately 8 months ago. 8 months. Around the time our conversations about starting a family had intensified, I'd thought David's increasing work hours and stress were related to the fertility discussions we'd been having. Now I wondered if he'd already been plotting his exit while I'd been researching prenatal vitamins. What exactly was he doing for them? I asked. Your husband has specialized skills in identity creation and verification systems. These organizations need ways to create seemingly legitimate identities for money laundering, to open bank accounts, establish credit lines. She tapped the folder. Based on evidence seized from your home office, he appears to have been creating entire digital lives, complete with fabricated history, credentials, and documentation. And Veronica? Veronica Lawson is an alias. Her real name is Katerina Petrova. Detective Larson showed me another photo, the woman I'd glimpsed occasionally at David's company functions, smiling next to my husband. She's a known associate of Volkov's organization, likely placed in your husband's company to recruit him. The romantic relationship may have been strategic from her end. The revelation twisted the knife of betrayal even deeper. Not only had David been cheating on me, but his affair partner might have been manipulating him from the beginning, which somehow made his betrayal both worse and slightly more comprehensible. Where is she now? We're tracking her. The Mexican authorities confirmed she departed Cancun the day after your husband returned to the U.S., but her current whereabouts are unknown. As Detective Larson continued outlining the investigation's progress, my mind struggled to reconcile the David I'd known, the man who remembered every anniversary, who nursed me through pneumonia 3 years ago, who cried at sad movies despite his protestations otherwise, with this shadow figure who created false identities for criminals and planned to abandon his wife during life-altering surgery. What happens next? I asked finally. Your husband is being held without bail, charged with bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and potentially more as we uncover additional evidence. Volkov is also in custody, facing numerous federal charges. Their cooperation could prove valuable in dismantling larger networks. And me? Am I in danger? Detective Larson's hesitation spoke volumes. We believe the most immediate threat has been neutralized with these arrests. However, these organizations have long memories and extensive networks. Until we better understand the full scope of your husband's involvement, we're recommending continued caution. What does that mean practically? Enhanced security at whatever residence you choose, regular check-ins with our department, potentially some lifestyle adjustments until the case concludes. Lifestyle adjustments, a clinical term for upending an already shattered life. After Detective Larson left, I sat alone in the hotel restaurant, watching normal people having normal days, business meetings, family vacations, romantic breakfasts, while my reality had transformed into something unrecognizable. My phone buzzed with a text from Jen, checking in. I replied with reassurances I didn't feel. As I was preparing to return to my room, the hostess approached with a small envelope. This was left for you at the front desk, Ms. Mitchell. Inside was a key card for a room in the same hotel and a note in unfamiliar handwriting. Room 847. 2 p.m. Come alone. Information about David you need to know. A friend. Every instinct warned against this meeting, but curiosity and the desperate need for answers outweighed caution. I considered calling Detective Larson but hesitated. What if this friend had legitimate information that might disappear once police became involved? After an hour of internal debate, I decided on a compromise. I would go, but I'd leave a sealed note in my room detailing where I was going and why, to be opened if I didn't return within an hour. I'd also keep my location services active on my phone, which Jen was monitoring after the events of the past week. At precisely 2 p.m., I knocked on the door of room 847, my heart pounding with equal parts anxiety and determination. There was a long pause before the door opened, revealing a face I recognized but couldn't immediately place. A woman in her early 40s, her dark hair now cropped short, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Sarah," she said simply. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." As she stepped back, recognition clicked. "You're David's assistant, Rebecca." She nodded, closing the door behind me. "Former assistant. I was fired 3 days ago. Please, sit down. We don't have much time." The room was standard hotel fare, indistinguishable from my own except for the papers spread across the desk and bed. Printouts, photographs, what appeared to be financial records. "Why am I here?" I asked, remaining standing despite her invitation. "Because there are things about David, about his situation, that the police don't know yet. Things you should understand before making any decisions about your future." Her tone was earnest, but caution kept me wary. "How do I know you're not part of whatever David was involved in?" A flash of pain crossed her features. "I worked for David for 6 years. I thought I knew him. Then 3 months ago, I began noticing discrepancies, strange meetings not in his official calendar, calls he'd take in the stairwell rather than his office, financial reports that didn't add up." She gestured to the papers. "I started keeping records. Nothing concrete at first, just inconsistencies. Then Veronica, or Katerina, I guess, joined the company, and everything accelerated. David changed, became secretive, started staying late with her for projects that never appeared in any company files. Why didn't you report this? To the police, or at least company management?" Rebecca looked down. "I did, eventually. To Martin Reeves, the company's security director. He thanked me for my diligence and said he'd handle it internally." Her mouth twisted bitterly. 3 days ago, I was called to HR and terminated for performance issues that had never been mentioned in 7 years with the company. Martin didn't even look me in the eye. The implication was clear. "You think the company is involved in whatever David was doing?" "I think it goes higher than David, deeper than a single rogue employee." She handed me a folder. "These are copies of communications I managed to document. Emails, meeting notes, financial transfers between shell companies I traced. I've sent everything to the FBI, but..." She hesitated. "I'm worried it will get buried. Too many powerful people implicated." I opened the folder, scanning documents filled with corporate jargon and financial notation beyond my immediate comprehension. Why show me this? What am I supposed to do with it? Because buried in there is evidence that David may not have been acting entirely of his own volition. Rebecca pointed to a specific email chain. These messages between Martin and someone identified only as V discuss leveraging David's vulnerability once your medical situation became known. They knew he was in over his head with certain investments, knew he'd need substantial funds. Quickly! I read the exchange she indicated, a chill spreading through me at the calculated way these people had discussed exploiting my surgery and David's financial desperation. "They manipulated him," Rebecca continued. "I'm not excusing what he did. It was unconscionable, cruel. But I think you should know he was being pressured, possibly threatened. They needed his skills for something bigger, and they used your situation as the perfect opportunity to compromise him completely." "Why would you risk telling me this? If what you're saying is true, these are dangerous people," she smiled grimly. "My apartment was broken into last night. My computer, backup, drives, everything taken. I'm leaving the country tonight. My cousin in Toronto is expecting me. But I couldn't go without giving you this information. You deserve to know the full picture. I studied her, searching for signs of deception, but finding only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine concern. These people, whoever they are, do they know about the money being returned? About the arrests? They know. And they'll be looking for alternative solutions, damage control. David's arrest complicates things but doesn't end them. Meaning what exactly? Rebecca gathered her papers methodically. Meaning watch your back, Sarah. David might be in custody, but the organization he was working with, wittingly or unwittingly, is still operational, and they had plans for that money that are now disrupted. As I left Rebecca's room 30 minutes later, her documents copied and secured in my bag, my mind raced with implications. If what she suggested was true, David's betrayal existed in a more complex context than I'd initially understood, not exonerated, but influenced by external pressure and manipulation. More disturbingly, the danger hadn't ended with David's arrest. It had merely shifted form. I was still processing these revelations when I rounded the corner toward my room and stopped short. The door was ajar, a hotel staff member visible inside. "Excuse me," I called sharply. "What are you doing in my room?" The man turned, revealing the uniform of hotel maintenance. "Just checking the air conditioning, ma'am. Front desk reported a complaint." I made no such complaint. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance? Concern? Richard and I found a quiet corner in the courthouse hallway, away from the flow of people. He looked different somehow. The polished, confident attorney replaced by someone more hesitant, more human. "Where's Ashley?" I asked, noticing she was no longer waiting on the bench outside the courtroom. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "She left. We decided it would be best." I raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. Whatever had transpired between them during our recess was their business now. "Your apology in there," I said instead. "Was that Marcus's idea?" Richard's lips tightened slightly. "No. Believe it or not, I'm capable of recognizing when I've been an ass." 12 years of marriage suggests otherwise, I replied, but there was no real heat in my words. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. A rare gesture. Of frustration he typically avoided in professional settings. I deserved that. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of our shared history suspended between us. 12 years of marriage, vacations in Santorini and Paris, the miscarriage, in our 4th year that we never really talked about afterward, the gradual drift into separate lives under the same roof. How had we gone from finishing each other's sentences to becoming strangers? "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard finally asked, his voice quieter now. "About the firm, about your other businesses, all of it." It was the question I'd been expecting since the moment my ownership was revealed. I'd prepared answers, rehearsed explanations, but standing here now, I found myself searching for the truth beneath the practiced responses. At first, it was because I didn't want to overshadow you, I admitted. You were so proud of making associate, so driven to become partner. I thought if you knew your wife essentially owned the firm, it would diminish your accomplishments somehow. Richard's expression softened slightly. "And later?" "Later." I hesitated. "Later, it just became the status quo. The longer I waited to tell you, the harder it became to bring it up. And honestly, after a while, I started to wonder if you'd even care." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Richard, when was the last time you asked me about my day? About my interests? About anything in my life that didn't directly impact yours?" I shook my head. "You stopped seeing me years ago. I became background noise in your life. The wife who managed the house, hosted your business dinners, and never complained about your late nights at the office." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. I didn't know how to tell you that the quiet, supportive wife you took for granted was actually a successful businesswoman in her own right, I continued, not without it sounding like an accusation. Richard leaned against the wall, looking suddenly tired. I really believed you were happy with our arrangement, that you preferred being taken care of. That's because it was easier for you to believe that than to actually ask me what I wanted, I pointed out. Just like it was easier to start something with Ashley than to address the problems in our marriage. He winced at the mention of her name. That was a mistake. The affair or bringing her to our divorce hearing? I studied her, searching for signs of deception but finding only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine concern. These people, whoever they are, do they know about the money being returned? About the arrests? They know, and they'll be looking for alternative solutions, damage control. David's arrest complicates things, but doesn't end them. Meaning what exactly? Rebecca gathered her papers methodically. Meaning watch your back, Sarah. David might be in custody, but the organization he was working with, wittingly or unwittingly, is still operational. And they had plans for that money that are now disrupted. As I left Rebecca's room 30 minutes later, her documents copied and secured in my bag, my mind raced with implications. If what she suggested was true, David's betrayal existed in a more complex context than I'd initially understood, not exonerated, but influenced by external pressure and manipulation. More disturbingly, the danger hadn't ended with David's arrest. It had merely shifted form. I was still processing these revelations when I rounded the corner toward my room and stopped short. The door was ajar, a hotel staff member visible inside. "Excuse me?" I called sharply. "What are you doing in my room?" The man turned, revealing the uniform of hotel maintenance. "Just checking the air conditioning, ma'am. Front desk reported a complaint." I made no such complaint. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance? Concern? Before his expression smoothed into professional neutrality. "Must be a mix-up with room numbers. My apologies." He brushed past me, tool bag in hand, and I watched him walk calmly toward the elevator before entering my room cautiously. Nothing seemed disturbed at first glance, but the sense of violation was immediate and unsettling. Someone had been in my space, whether legitimate hotel staff or something more sinister. I called the front desk. "Did maintenance request access to my room today? For an air conditioning issue?" "One moment, ma'am." I heard keyboard clicking. "No, we have no work orders for your room today." My heart rate accelerated. "A maintenance worker was just in my room. He said you'd reported an issue." A pause. "I'll send security up immediately, Ms. Mitchell." While waiting for security, I did. A quick inventory. My luggage appeared untouched, bathroom undisturbed. Then I noticed the sealed envelope containing my note about meeting Rebecca. It had been moved slightly from where I'd left it on the desk. Almost imperceptible, but definitely not in the exact position I'd placed it. Hotel security arrived, took my statement, and conducted a superficial search of the room, finding nothing obviously amiss. They offered to move me to a different room, which I accepted immediately. As the security manager arranged the transfer, I texted Detective Larson about the incident, then called Jen to update her. "I'm coming to get you," she insisted. "Hotel security isn't enough if these people are as connected as everyone keeps suggesting." "Detective Larson is sending an officer," I assured her, though her concern mirrored my own growing unease. "I'll be fine for now." But as I gathered my belongings, Rebecca's warning echoed in my mind. "Watch your back, Sarah." The implications were becoming increasingly clear. My recovery, physical, emotional, and financial, would happen against the backdrop of an ongoing criminal investigation, where I was now both victim and potential witness. 2 hours later, newly situated in a different room with a police officer, Stationed in the hallway, I received a call from Mark Tanner. "Sarah, I need to see you as soon as possible," he said without preamble. "There's been another development with your accounts." My stomach dropped. What kind of development? I thought everything was secured. "It is, but—" He hesitated. "This isn't a conversation for the phone. Can you come to the bank tomorrow morning? First thing? Mark, after everything that's happened, you can't drop something like that and expect me to wait until tomorrow for details." He sighed. "You're right." "I apologize," his voice lowered. "We've received inquiries about your accounts, specifically the reverse transactions, from a federal agency I'm not familiar with. They're presenting documentation requesting access to your financial records that appears legitimate, but something feels off." "What agency?" "They identified themselves as part of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which exists, but the paperwork and approach don't match standard protocols. I've initiated verification procedures, but I wanted you to be aware." Another attempt to access my funds, this time through official-looking channels. The persistence was both frightening and revealing, whatever operation David had been involved with. My recovered money remained a priority target. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing yet. I've flagged this with our security team and legal department, but given recent events, I thought you should know immediately. And Sarah," he paused, "you might consider moving those funds to a different institution altogether, perhaps one with no connection to your previous financial history with David." It was an unusual suggestion from a banker, essentially advising me to take my substantial assets elsewhere, which only underscored the seriousness of his concern. "I'll think about it," I promised. "And Mark, thank you. Again." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the weight of successive revelations pressing down on me. Every layer peeled back revealed a situation more complex and threatening than I'd initially understood. What had begun as a devastating personal betrayal was expanding into something that involved criminal organizations, corporate complicity, and now potentially compromised government agencies. My phone chimed with a text from Detective Larson. "Officer Williams will remain posted outside your room tonight. We're investigating the maintenance worker incident. We'll brief you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. At least I wasn't facing this alone. Between Mark, Detective Larson, Jen, and now a uniformed officer in the hallway, I had allies. But as I prepared for bed in this strange hotel room, wincing at the surgical pain that reasserted itself with every movement, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far beyond a betrayed wife seeking justice for financial theft. Was becoming a threat to powerful people who weren't accustomed to being thwarted, people who had already demonstrated their willingness to exploit vulnerability and ignore basic human decency in pursuit of their objectives. And somewhere in the county jail, the man I had loved for 15 years, the architect of this nightmare, whether by choice or coercion, held pieces of the puzzle I still couldn't fully see. Morning arrived after a fitful night of half-sleep and heightened vigilance. Every hotel noise, ice machines, distant elevators, doors closing down the hallway, triggered a surge of adrenaline. By the time Detective Larson arrived at 8 a.m., I was already on my third cup of coffee, exhaustion and anxiety creating a jittery combination. "We found him," she announced without preamble, setting a folder on the small table by the window. "The maintenance worker. His name is Eric Donovan, and he's not hotel staff." She showed me a mugshot of the man who'd been in my room, his expression harder in the photo than the apologetic maintenance worker I'd encountered, but unmistakably the same person. He has a record, mostly small-time stuff, breaking and entering, identity theft, but he's been linked to larger operations as a low-level operative, hired hand. "Hired by whom?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "We're working on that. But his known associates include several individuals connected to Alexei Volkov's network." "Was he looking for something specific in my room?" Detective Larson's expression turned grim. We believe so. When we arrested him last night, he had this. She produced an evidence bag containing a small electronic device I didn't recognize. It's a specialized bug, high-end military grade, not something an ordinary thief would possess. The implications sent a chill through me. They were going to monitor me? Why? Information gathering, most likely. Your conversations, movements, contacts. These organizations operate on intelligence, knowing what their opposition knows, anticipating next moves. Opposition. The word struck me forcefully. That's what I'd become without ever intending it. Opposition to whatever criminal enterprise had ensnared my husband. What happens now? I asked. Donovan's not talking yet, but we're hoping he'll reconsider once he understands the severity of the charges. In the meantime, I strongly recommend relocating again, somewhere more secure than a hotel, not associated with your name. I have a cabin, I found myself saying, in the Berkshires, wedding gift from my godmother. It's under a family trust, not directly linked to me or David on paper. Few people know about it. Detective Larson nodded approvingly. Perfect. When can you leave? Today? I need to meet with my bank manager first, but after that, I'll arrange for an escort. Not marked police. That would attract attention. But reliable protection. She glanced at the windows, a habit I'd noticed before. Always assessing, always vigilant. The less people who know your destination, the better. Not your sister, not your friends. Just me and the officers assigned to your detail. The severity of these precautions underscored the danger I still faced. What about David? Should I be concerned about him arranging something from jail? His communications are monitored and he's been denied bail. That said, she hesitated. He's been asking to see you, repeatedly. Claims he has critical information that can only be shared with you directly. And you think I should talk to him? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. I think information is valuable, and David Mitchell is currently our best source on Volkov's organization. If he's willing to share that with you rather than federal investigators, there may be a strategic advantage in hearing what he has to say. It was a coldly practical assessment, devoid of the emotional complexities that colored my own perspective on seeing David again. But she wasn't wrong. David clearly possessed knowledge that might prove crucial to understanding the full scope of the situation I was embroiled in. I'll think about it, I said finally. After I'm settled somewhere secure. Detective Larson seemed satisfied with this compromise. She departed to arrange my protection detail, while I prepared for my meeting with Mark at the bank. First Regional's main branch exuded stability and tradition. Marble columns, polished brass fixtures, hushed conversations in private offices. Mark met me in the lobby, his normally cheerful demeanor subdued as he escorted me past the teller windows to his office in the back. I've completed the verification process on those federal inquiries, he said once the door closed behind us. They're sophisticated forgeries, excellent ones, but definitely not legitimate government documentation. So more of Volkov's people, trying another angle. Mark nodded grimly. Likely so. Which brings me to my recommendation. He slid a document across his desk. I've prepared the paperwork to transfer your funds to an entirely new account at Somerset Trust. They're smaller, more exclusive, with enhanced security protocols. No connection whatsoever to your previous banking history. Somerset Trust was known for catering to high-net-worth clients with complex security needs, foreign diplomats, celebrities requiring privacy, individuals with legitimate reasons to protect their assets from public scrutiny. This seems extreme, I observed, though I was already reaching for the papers. These are extreme circumstances. Mark's expression was deadly serious. Sarah, I've been in banking for 28 years. I've seen financial fraud, divorce asset hiding, even organized crime money movement. What's happening with your accounts reflects a level of persistence and sophistication that concerns me deeply. As I signed the transfer documentation, Marks continued explaining the security measures being implemented. Dual authentication for any transaction requests, no telephone banking access, strict in-person verification protocols. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his desk drawer. This USB drive contains all your banking records from the past 5 years. Every transaction, every transfer, account openings and closings. Everything. I accepted the small device, confused. Why would I need this? Because history is important. Patterns matter. If you're trying to understand how David became involved with these people when the financial entanglement began, this might provide insight that verbal explanations won't. It was a thoughtful gesture from someone who'd gone far beyond professional obligation in protecting my interests. Thank you, Mark, for everything. He dismissed my gratitude with a wave. I'm just doing my job, though I admit it's become rather more exciting than typical bank management lately. I left First Regional with my finances more secure than ever. The USB drive tucked safely in my handbag alongside Rebecca's documents. 2 pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to comprehend. My police escort, a plainclothes officer named Rivera, who looked more like an off-duty gym trainer than law enforcement, was waiting in an unmarked sedan outside the bank. We made one stop at a department store for me to purchase essentials for my stay at the cabin, then headed northwest out of the city. As urban landscapes gave way to increasingly rural scenery, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Accessing. Accounts through Somerset won't work either. We need to talk. Mutual benefit possible. Reply to arrange meeting. KK, Katerina, Veronica, David's mistress and apparent handler. Officer Rivera noticed my expression. Problem? I hesitated, then handed him my phone. Just received this. He studied the message, then immediately pulled over and made a call. After a brief technical conversation I couldn't fully follow, he returned my phone. Detective Larson is tracing the number. Don't reply. We're changing routes just in case. How would she know about Somerset? The accounts were just created an hour ago. Rivera's expression was grim. That's exactly what we're concerned about. The information flow shouldn't be that immediate. For the remainder of the drive, we took secondary roads, doubling back occasionally, once even parking behind an abandoned gas station for 20 minutes, while Rivera scanned our surroundings with binoculars. It was like something from a spy movie, except the anxiety knotting my stomach was entirely real. We reached the cabin near dusk, a small A-frame structure nestled among pines, overlooking a lake that reflected the fading light. In happier times, David and I had spent long weekends here, hiking in summer, snowshoeing in winter, disconnecting from work and city stress. Now it would serve as my refuge from dangers he had helped create. Officer Rivera conducted a thorough sweep of the property before declaring it secure. A second officer arrived shortly after, introductions made, shifts organized. They would alternate monitoring the perimeter, one always awake while the other rested in the small guest room. Detective, Larson will check in tomorrow, Rivera informed me. Cell service is spotty here, but the satellite phone in our vehicle always works if you need immediate assistance. Alone in the cabin's main bedroom, I finally allowed myself a moment of genuine emotion, not just fear or anxiety, but the deep, wrenching grief I'd been suppressing since waking from surgery to find my husband gone and my life unraveling. I sobbed into the pillow, body shaking with the force of feelings too complex to name. When the storm finally passed, I rose and moved to the small desk overlooking the lake. From my bag, I withdrew Rebecca's documents, the USB drive from Mark, and a notebook I'd purchased during our shopping stop. If I was ever going to understand what had happened to my marriage, my finances, my sense of basic reality, I needed to assemble the pieces systematically. Track the progression from David the loving husband to David the criminal conspirator. identify when and how he'd been compromised, how deeply he was involved, and whether any part of our shared life had been genuine. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and began scrolling through years of financial records. Somewhere in these transactions was the thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire deception. I just had to find it. The financial forensics consumed me through the night and into the next morning. What began as a methodical review of bank statements evolved into a complex web of sticky notes, timeline sketches, and highlighted transactions spread across the cabin's dining table. Officer Rivera occasionally glanced at my work with professional curiosity, but asked no questions. A pattern emerged gradually, becoming clearer as I cross-referenced the financial records with Rebecca's documents. 18 months ago, David had opened a separate checking account. Nothing suspicious there, as we'd always maintained individual accounts alongside our joint ones. But the activity in this particular account told a story. Regular deposits always under $10,000, the threshold for mandatory reporting to financial authorities, followed by transfers to offshore entities with generic corporate names. The amounts grew over time, starting at $3,000 monthly, eventually reaching $8,500. Consulting fees, according to the transaction notes. Around 8 months ago, the pattern shifted. The deposits continued, but new withdrawals appeared, large ones, to investment platforms I'd never heard of. Some labeled as Opportunity Fund or Venture Capital Placement. This aligned with Rebecca's documents, which included fragments of emails discussing high-yield opportunities and guaranteed returns. Then, 3 months ago, around the time Veronica Caterina had appeared, everything escalated. The separate account saw a sudden influx of $50,000 from an entity called Meridian Consulting Group, followed by withdrawals totaling nearly $200,000 to various investment vehicles. Within weeks, those investments showed massive losses. I was staring at the documented unraveling of my husband's financial life, a progression from apparent side consulting to increasingly desperate investment attempts, culminating in catastrophic losses. All hidden from me, all coinciding with my tumor diagnosis and treatment planning. Detective Larson arrived mid-morning, accepting coffee from Officer Rivera while reviewing my findings. "This tracks with what we're piecing together from the Financial Crimes Unit," she confirmed. "Your husband appears to have been pulled in gradually. First legitimate consulting work for shell companies connected to Volkov, then increasingly questionable assignments. The investment losses were likely by design." "What do you mean?" "It's a common tactic in these organizations. They offer apparent investment opportunities, guarantee significant returns, encourage larger and larger buy-ins. But the investments are rigged to fail. The target loses everything, finds themselves deeply indebted to dangerous people, and becomes vulnerable to coercion." I processed this information, connecting more dots. So they deliberately got him in over his head financially, then used that leverage to force his cooperation on more serious criminal activities. Exactly. And once he was compromised, your medical situation created the perfect opportunity for them to push him toward a more drastic solution. The implication hung in the air between us. David's theft wasn't a simple betrayal or midlife crisis gone wrong. It was the culmination of a sophisticated, long-term manipulation by professional criminals. "It doesn't excuse what he did," I said, finally, voicing the conflict that had been building inside me since meeting Rebecca. "He still made choices, terrible ones, at every step." "Absolutely," Detective Larson agreed. "Understanding context doesn't erase responsibility. He had options besides stealing from his wife during her surgery." Her bluntness was oddly comforting. The emerging complexities of David's situation could easily have become an excuse to minimize what he'd done to me. Detective Larson wasn't allowing that equivocation. "Has he said anything useful since his arrest?" I asked. "Limited cooperation. He's provided some names, some operational details, but he's holding back the most valuable information. She studied me carefully. He insists he'll only share everything with you, says it involves your safety directly. And you still think I should consider meeting him? Professionally speaking, yes. Information is our best protection at this point. But personally, she shook her head slightly, I wouldn't blame you for telling him to go to hell. The contradiction between these perspectives mirrored my own internal conflict. Part of me never wanted to see David again. The part still raw from betrayal, still processing the realization that the man I'd built a life with had been willing to abandon me at my most vulnerable. But another part needed answers that only he could provide, about our past, about the current danger, about whether anything in our shared life had been genuine. Lakeside Coffee was exactly what its name suggested. A charming cafe perched on the shore of a small lake, its back deck extending over the water. In tourist season, it would be bustling with vacationers. In the current off-season lull, only a handful of tables were occupied, making the tactical planning both easier and more obvious. I arrived at 1:30, escorted by Detective Larson in plainclothes. She posed as a friend, the two of us chatting casually while her eyes continuously scanned our surroundings. 4 other officers were already positioned, one behind the counter posing as a barista, one reading a newspaper by the window, 2 more at separate tables with laptops. Remember, Detective Larson murmured as we settled at a table with clear sightlines to both entrances. If anything feels wrong, use the code word, headache. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not feeling particularly heroic, I admitted, adjusting the wire concealed beneath my sweater. Just desperate for answers. She squeezed my hand briefly before moving to her own table, becoming just another customer enjoying the lakeside view while working on her tablet. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened, and Katerina walked in. I'd only seen her in photos, but nothing had prepared me for her physical presence. Tall, striking, moving with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. She wore simple dark jeans and a leather jacket, her blonde hair pulled back, minimal makeup accentuating Slavic features. She spotted me immediately, her eyes flicking around the cafe in a quick assessment before she approached. No bag, I noticed, nothing that could conceal a weapon. Sarah. Her accent was barely detectable, just a slight lengthening of certain vowels. Thank you for coming. You didn't leave me much choice, I replied as she slid into the seat across from me. Your texts made it clear the situation is escalating. Server approached. Not the undercover officer, but an actual cafe employee. Katerina ordered an espresso without looking at the menu. Let's be direct, she said, once we were alone again. You think you understand what happened with David and your money? You don't. Then explain it to me. She leaned forward slightly. David was compromised, yes. In debt to dangerous people, yes. But what no one has told you, what the police haven't figured out yet, is that David was never the primary target. You were. The statement landed like a physical blow. Me? Why would anyone target me? Your patients. Specifically the access you have to certain individuals through your physical therapy practice. I stared at her, struggling to make sense of this claim. My private practice specialized in spinal rehabilitation. My clients were diverse, from car accident victims to athletes with stress injuries to elderly patients maintaining mobility. Nothing that would interest criminal organizations. I don't understand, I said finally. 3 of your regular patients work for Northfield Technologies. One is the company's chief security officer. Another is their head of network infrastructure. The third is a senior engineer on their quantum computing team. The names flashed through my mind. Carl Henderson, bi-weekly appointments for chronic back pain. Margaret Wu, recovering from disc surgery. Thomas Brantley, sports-related shoulder injury. All with Northfield Technologies ID badges, all higher level, employees based on our casual conversations during therapy sessions. So So Northfield Technologies has developed an encryption system that certain interests find problematic for their operations. Access to their internal systems would be extremely valuable. Understanding began to dawn. You thought I could somehow, what? Plant something on their devices? Extract information while doing physical therapy? Katerina's espresso arrived. She took a deliberate sip before answering. The original plan was sophisticated. David would create digital identities and access profiles. You would innocently deploy specialized hardware during therapy sessions, devices, disguised as standard medical equipment, developed to capture network credentials when within proximity of target devices. That's insane. David knows I would never agree to something like that. Of course, that's why you were never meant to know. David was supposed to handle the technical aspects, and Alexei's people would modify your equipment without your knowledge. Your role was to be entirely unwitting. My mind raced through implications. And when David refused to involve me, he became a problem, she confirmed. He was willing to provide technical services, launder money, even develop false identities. But he drew a line at bringing you into the operation, even unknowingly. So they deliberately pushed him into financial desperation, I concluded, the pieces clicking together. The failed investments, the mounting debts, all to force his compliance on the plan involving me. And when your medical condition presented an unexpected opportunity, the pressure intensified. Your surgery created a perfect scenario. David could access your finances, solve his debt problem, disappear with new identities we created, and you would be left without the resources to question what had happened. The clinical detachment with which she described this plan, the calculated exploitation of my health crisis, my husband's vulnerabilities, my patient's trust, made my skin crawl. Why are you telling me this now? Katerina set down her cup precisely. Because the plan has evolved. Alexei's arrest creates an opportunity for realignment of priorities. Meaning what? Meaning I can offer you protection. Real protection, not the limited security these police can provide. In exchange, you convince David to share what he knows about certain operational details with me rather than the authorities. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. You want me to help the people who were planning to use me as an unwitting spy? The same people who manipulated my husband into stealing from me during surgery? I want to offer you a way out of a situation that will otherwise continue to escalate. Her tone remained matter-of-fact. David created fail-safes, insurance against betrayal, information stored securely that would activate if anything happened to him. The organization needs that information contained. So go talk to David yourself. He refuses to see me, but he's agreed to see you. Her gaze was unnervingly direct. The organization is willing to consider this matter closed if those fail-safes are neutralized. You get your life back. David potentially gets a reduced sentence through cooperation. I get what I need to satisfy my superiors. The offer was tempting in its simplicity, a clean resolution to the nightmare my life had become. But the professional confidence in Katerina's expression told me she was accustomed to people accepting such deals, to leveraging fear and uncertainty to achieve her objectives. And if I refuse? Then the organization continues its efforts to recover what it considers its investment in this operation. Your recovered funds, the information David possesses, the access you represent. She glanced briefly toward the lake. They are persistent, and they have resources that extend far beyond what you've seen so far. I took a slow breath, conscious of the wire recording our conversation, of Detective Larson watching intently from her table, of the critical importance of keeping Katerina talking. Let's say I'm interested. What exactly would I need to do? A hint of satisfaction crossed her features. Visit David. Convince him to reveal the location of his insurance files. Assure him that cooperation will result in protection for both of you. Then relay that information to me. And I'm supposed to trust that once you have what you want, you'll just leave us alone? Trust is irrelevant. This is business. The organization invests resources where they yield returns. Once the David Mitchell operation is no longer viable, resources will be redirected elsewhere. I'd need time to think about it. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires. She slid a burner phone across the table. My number is the only one programmed. Call when you decide. As she rose to leave, I ventured one final question, the one that had haunted me since discovering David's betrayal. Was any of it real? Between you and him? Katerina paused, something flickering briefly across her composed features. That's a question for David, not me. Then she was gone, moving gracefully through the cafe and disappearing into a black sedan waiting outside. I remained seated, processing the conversation while Detective Larson approached, sliding into Katerina's vacated chair. We got everything, she confirmed quietly. Including vehicle details. Officers are following at a distance. She wants me to help them contain whatever insurance files David created, I summarized, in exchange for being left alone. Classic plea bargain approach, Detective Larson observed. But with no legal enforceability and no reason to trust their word. What would you do? I asked, suddenly exhausted by the weight of impossible choices. She considered the question seriously. Professionally, I'd say use the meeting with David. To gather intelligence on these insurance files, they could be critical evidence. Personally, she hesitated, I'd be very careful about getting pulled deeper into their world, even with promises of resolution. As we left the cafe, surveillance, teams continuing to track Katerina's vehicle, I found myself more conflicted than ever. The meeting had provided crucial context about why I'd been targeted, but it had also expanded the threat beyond anything I'd initially understood. Whatever David had to tell me tomorrow, it would need to address not just his betrayal, but the ongoing danger from an organization that seemingly viewed me as both an asset and a loose end, and the decision about how to proceed, whether to consider Katerina's offer, fully cooperate with law enforcement, or find some middle path, rested entirely on my shoulders. The county detention center existed in that institutional limbo between jail and prison, utilitarian, depressing, smelling of disinfectant and desperation. I followed a correctional officer through a series of security checkpoints, each one punctuated by the metallic clang of locking doors. Detective Larson had arranged for a private meeting room rather than the standard visitation area with its plexiglass barriers and monitored phones. The room was small, containing only a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. Cameras monitored from high-ceiling corners, but no audio recording. A concession to attorney-client privilege that was being extended to our conversation. I'd barely settled when another door opened and David appeared, escorted by a guard. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. He'd lost weight in the week since his arrest. The confident, polished IT consultant was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on me. Sarah, he exhaled. My name carrying volumes of emotion I couldn't fully decipher. You came. Hands on the table, Mitchell, the guard instructed, securing David's handcuffs to a ring embedded in the metal surface. Visitor stays on that side of the table. Any physical contact ends the meeting immediately. After the guard's departure, silence stretched between us, a yawning chasm of unspoken accusations, explanations, and recriminations. How's your recovery? David finally asked, his voice uncertain. From the surgery? The banality of the question almost made me laugh. Better than my recovery from discovering my husband emptied our accounts and fled the country during the procedure, Hitaom winced. I deserve that, and worse. Why am I here, David? What's so important that you'll only tell me, not the investigators? He leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, lowering his voice despite the privacy of our meeting. I met with Katerina yesterday. Here. She said she'd spoken with you. That caught me off guard. She never mentioned meeting you. because it didn't go as she planned. She offered me a deal, similar to what she proposed to you, I imagine. Cooperation. In exchange for protection, reduced charges. And I refused. Which means the organization is now pursuing alternative approaches, including using you to get what they want. I studied him, searching for signs of manipulation or deception. Habits I'd never needed with David before, but which now seemed essential. Why would you refuse their offer? It sounds better than years in federal prison. Something hardened in his expression. Because I know these people, Sarah. Any deal they make is temporary. The moment you're no longer useful, the protection evaporates. I won't put you at risk again. Again, I repeated pointedly. Because you've already put me at considerable risk. David's eyes dropped to his restrained hands. I never intended. He stopped, shaking his head. No, that's not right. Intentions don't matter now. Actions do. And my actions hurt you unforgivably. The uncharacteristic accountability surprised me. Katerina told me you refused to involve me in their original plan, that you drew a line at using me to access my patients at Northfield Technologies. She told you about that? His head snapped up, eyes wide. What else did she share? I recounted. My conversation with Katerina, the original plan, the escalating pressure on David after his refusal, the opportunity my surgery had presented. With each detail, his expression cycled through recognition, shame, and something that looked almost like relief. At least now you know I wasn't just abandoning you for another woman during a health crisis, he said when I finished. Though what I actually did was hardly better. Why didn't you come to me, David? Before things spiraled so completely out of control. We could have gone to the police together, found a way out. By the time I realized how deep I was, they already had leverage. Financial ruin, potential criminal charges for the work I'd already done for them. His voice dropped lower. And they made it very clear they knew your schedule, your routines. The implied threat wasn't subtle. I thought of Alexei's casual reference to my convenient surgery during the confrontation at our house. So you chose to steal our life savings rather than risk them following through on threats. I chose what I thought was the path of least harm, he corrected. Pay off my debts to them with the money. Create new identities for us both. Contact you after your recovery and disappear together. Start fresh somewhere they couldn't find us. The plan sounded delusional now, but I could trace the desperate logic. And Veronica, Katerina, how does she fit into this noble protection scenario? David's expression clouded. That's complicated. She was my handler, assigned to keep me on task, escalate my involvement gradually. The personal relationship. He hesitated. It wasn't entirely tactical, at least not for me. I was in a dark place. Guilt over the work I was doing, fear for our safety, your diagnosis. She offered understanding, escape. While deliberately manipulating you toward their objectives, I noted. Yes. No excuses, no justification, just confirmation of what we both knew. I took a deep breath, refocusing on the reason for this meeting. You said you have information that could protect me. What is it? Insurance, he replied. Evidence I've compiled about the organization's operations, personnel, financial networks. Enough to dismantle significant portions of their infrastructure if released to the right authorities. And where is this evidence? David's gaze flicked to the cameras, then back to me. Secured in multiple locations with automated release protocols if certain conditions are met, like harm coming to either of us. Dead man switches, I surmised. He nodded. Along with direct distribution channels to specific law enforcement. Divisions I've researched and determined to be uncorrupted. The organization knows these safeguards exist, but not their specifics. That's what they want from me. the ability to neutralize those protocols. And from me? What do they want from me? Your influence with me. They believe I'll reveal the details. To protect you. He met my eyes directly. They're not entirely wrong. The implication hung between us, that despite everything, his concern for my safety remained a vulnerability that could be exploited. So, what am I supposed to do with this information? I asked finally. Katerina gave me until tomorrow to agree to her proposition. Don't agree to anything, David said firmly, but don't outright refuse either. Tell her you need to see evidence of their good faith, specific, verifiable actions that demonstrate their commitment to leaving you alone. Like what? Like withdrawing surveillance on your sister's apartment, removing the tracking software they installed on your personal laptop, ceasing attempts to access your new banking arrangements. I stared at him, cold horror spreading through me. They're watching Jen? They've hacked my computer? Almost certainly, he confirmed grimly. These aren't amateurs, Sarah. They're methodical, thorough. Assume everything electronic is compromised unless specifically secured by law enforcement. The violations kept multiplying, extending beyond financial theft into every corner of my life. Why should I trust anything you say? I asked, anger resurfacing. You've lied to me for months, years possibly. You shouldn't trust me, he acknowledged. Verify everything independently, but consider this. I could have accepted Katerina's deal, reduced my own sentence, secured their version of protection. I didn't because I know it would ultimately endanger you more. It was a compelling point, assuming his rejection of their offer was genuine and not another layer of manipulation. Time's up, announced the guard, reopening the door. Wrap it up. David leaned forward urgently. Sarah, there's one more thing you need to know. The organization has someone inside law enforcement, high enough to access case details, influence, assignments. Who? I demanded as the guard approached. I don't know names, just that the compromise exists. Be careful who you trust with sensitive information. His expression softened fractionally. Despite everything, I never stopped loving you. Remember that when you decide what to do next? As the guard escorted him from the room, those final words echoed in my mind. Once, such a declaration would have meant everything. Now, it was just another complication in an already impossible situation. Detective Larson was waiting in the reception area. How did it go? I hesitated, David's warning about law enforcement infiltration fresh in my mind. What if Detective Larson herself was compromised? Or someone she reported to? He's cooperating more than before, I said carefully. Shared some details about how he became involved, the pressure tactics they used. Anything specific about these insurance files he supposedly created? Nothing concrete, just vague references to evidence he's gathered. It wasn't a complete lie, but the omission felt significant. My first deliberate withholding of information from the person coordinating my protection. But until I could verify David's claims about internal corruption, caution seemed prudent. As we drove away from the detention center, my mind raced through options. If David was telling the truth, my situation was even more precarious than I'd understood, surveilled from multiple angles with uncertain allies and experienced adversaries. Detective, I began hesitantly. How thoroughly has my digital security been assessed? My devices, accounts, that sort of thing? Basic sweeps for obvious surveillance, she replied. Why? Did David suggest something specific? Just that the organization might be more technologically sophisticated than we've accounted for, she nodded thoughtfully. I can arrange for more comprehensive screening through our cyber division, though it would mean surrendering your devices temporarily. I'd appreciate that, I said, making a mental note to back up essential information before handing over anything. Not out of distrust for Detective Larson specifically, but from a new awareness of systemic vulnerabilities. Back at the cabin, alone with my thoughts while officers patrolled outside, I faced the decision David had framed: how to respond to Katerina's offer without accepting or explicitly rejecting it. The burner phone she'd provided sat on the table before me, its presence a tangible reminder of pending deadlines and impossible choices. In the end, I composed a message that followed David's suggestion: neither acceptance nor rejection, but a request for demonstration of good faith. Need verification of your commitment before proceeding. Remove surveillance on my sister's apartment. Stop attempts to access my new accounts. Cease electronic monitoring of my devices. Once confirmed, we can discuss David's information. I pressed send before I could reconsider, then set the phone aside. Whether this would buy time, escalate tensions, or open a new negotiating channel remained to be seen. But it was, at least, a step toward reclaiming some agency in a situation where I'd been predominantly reactive. The burner phone remained silent the rest of the day, but that evening, my regular cell chimed with a text from an unknown number. Verification process initiated. Check your email in 30 minutes. Exactly 30 minutes later, an email arrived from an anonymous address. The subject line read simply, "Good faith demonstration." The body contained a single link. With trembling fingers, I clicked it, conscious of potential malware or tracking software. With trembling fingers, I clicked the link, conscious of potential malware or tracking software. The page loaded to reveal a split-screen display. On the left, a live security camera feed of my sister Jen's apartment building entrance. On the right, a timestamp-marked log of surveillance activity, showing when operatives had been deployed and withdrawn. At the bottom of the screen, a message flashed: "Surveillance terminated at 17:42 today. Verify independently." I immediately called Jen, trying to keep my voice casual while asking about any unfamiliar vehicles or people she might have noticed recently. Her response was characteristically unconcerned. She rarely paid attention to her surroundings with the same hypervigilance I'd developed. But she did mention that weird guy who's been sitting in the blue sedan for days was finally gone. The second part of their good faith evidence appeared 30 minutes later. Screenshots of failed attempts to penetrate my new banking arrangements, along with code showing the deactivation of the intrusion protocols. Last came evidence of the tracking software they'd installed on my laptop, complete with a remote uninstallation script that had supposedly been executed. I wasn't naive enough to believe they had truly abandoned all surveillance. More likely, they were shifting to less detectable methods while demonstrating compliance with my specific requests. The burner phone buzzed shortly after midnight. Verification provided as requested. Your turn now. Meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside. Park near the North Boat Landing. Come alone. I showed the message to Detective Larson the next morning, initiating an immediate flurry of activity. The park location was quickly mapped, surveillance positions identified, undercover officers assigned. "We'll have eyes on you the entire time," Larson assured me, helping adjust the nearly invisible wire they'd outfitted me with. Tactical response: "Is 30 seconds out if anything goes sideways? Just get her talking about their operations, any specific threats or demands. And if she mentions the internal law enforcement connection?" Larson's expression tightened. "Especially that. We need to know who's compromised." The park was quiet at mid-morning, a light mist hanging over the water. I sat on the designated bench, trying to appear relaxed despite the wire against my skin and the knowledge of officers concealed throughout the surrounding area. Katerina arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the Veronica persona she'd adopted before. Gone were the bohemian clothes and artistic accessories, replaced by a severe business suit and sleek bob haircut. Only her calculating eyes remained. The same. "Sarah," she greeted, sitting beside me with casual precision. Close enough for quiet conversation, far enough to maintain personal space. "I appreciate your reconsideration." "I haven't reconsidered anything," I replied, I'm here to understand exactly what you're proposing, she smiled faintly. Direct. I've always appreciated that quality in you. So different from David's tendency toward evasion. She glanced around the park before continuing. My organization is willing to ensure your complete safety and financial compensation in exchange for your assistance with David. Additionally, we can guarantee the charges against him are reduced to minimum sentencing. Why would I trust any promises from people who've already stolen from me, threatened me, and invaded my privacy? Because unlike emotional assurances, we offer verifiable action. You requested demonstration of good faith. We complied immediately. Removing surveillance you shouldn't have placed in the first place is hardly a profound ethical gesture, I observed. Something like genuine amusement flickered across her features. We're not discussing ethics, Sarah. We're negotiating practical outcomes. She crossed her legs, adjusting her position slightly. Let me be more specific about what we're offering. $2 million transferred to an account of your choosing. Complete dissolution of all monitoring activities. Reduction of charges against David to ensure no more than 18 months of incarceration. The amount startled me, though I tried not to show it. And what exactly would I be doing to earn this generosity? Convincing David to deactivate his insurance protocols and surrender all evidence he's gathered against us. He seems convinced your organization would eliminate us both once you have what you want, Katerina sighed. David's paranoia is part of what makes him valuable, but it complicates matters unnecessarily. Think logically. If we wanted you eliminated, there have been numerous opportunities. Instead, we're offering compensation that could restart your life completely. After destroying it first, I noted. Collateral damage from David's choices, not organizational directive. She leaned closer. You need to understand something crucial. We are not some dramatic movie villain. We're a business operation with risk assessment protocols. Eliminating people creates investigations, attention, complications. It's inefficient and therefore rarely authorized. Her cold pragmatism was somehow more unsettling than outright threats would have been. What happens if I say no? Then we proceed without your assistance, which creates inconvenience but isn't catastrophic. David's leverage is significant but temporary. Eventually, we'll neutralize his insurance measures through other channels. You'll rebuild your life without our compensation, probably relying on witness protection resources. She checked her watch. Their protection has significant gaps, incidentally. Budget constraints. The casual reference to law enforcement limitations sent a chill through me. How much did they know about the current operation? Katerina stood, smoothing her skirt. You have 24 hours to decide. Same method of contact as before. She began walking away, then paused. Oh, and Sarah. The detective running your protection detail has a gambling problem that's created significant debt. Not directly relevant, perhaps, but information worth considering when evaluating security arrangements. She departed without looking back, leaving me with the sickening implication that they might have already compromised Detective Larson. The debrief afterward was tense, particularly when I relayed Katerina's implied knowledge of our operation and the insinuation about Larson's financial situation. It's standard intimidation tactics, Larson insisted, though her complexion had paled. They want you questioning your safety net, feeling isolated. Is there any truth to it? Asked the FBI agent who had joined our team. Larson's hesitation was brief but noticeable. I had some issues a few years back, completely resolved through department programs. They're dredging up old information to create distrust. The FBI agent nodded, but I caught the evaluative look he exchanged with his colleague. Trust, once questioned, was difficult to fully restore. Back at the safe house, I found myself mentally cataloging everything Katerina had said, searching for leverage or insight. The offer was substantial, life-changing money and David's early release. but accepting meant trusting people who had already demonstrated sophisticated deception capabilities. Rejecting it meant potentially years of looking over my shoulder, regardless of witness protection programs. There was a third option, though, one neither Katerina nor David had articulated. If I could independently locate David's insurance evidence, I could potentially control the situation myself. With that bargaining chip, I could ensure my own safety without relying on promises from either side. That night, I began systematically analyzing what I knew about David, his habits, his technical approaches, the patterns of his thinking. Where would someone with his skills hide critical information that needed to remain both secure and accessible? The answer, when it finally came to me around 3 a.m., was both obvious and ingenious. Our wedding rings. Not my current band, but the custom pair we'd commissioned for our 10th anniversary 2 years ago. David had insisted on specific design elements that had seemed merely aesthetic at the time, an unusual internal channel structure, slightly heavier than standard. I'd noticed mine missing from my jewelry box after returning home from the hospital. At the time, I'd assumed David had taken it during his hasty departure, a sentimental gesture or perhaps for pawning value. Now I recognized it for what it almost certainly was, a storage device disguised as jewelry, containing at least a portion of his evidence cache. The question was, where had he hidden it? And what would I do with the information once I found it? The detention center's visitor log showed a pattern I hadn't noticed before. David's former assistant, Marcus, had visited him twice since his arrest. Marcus, quiet, efficient, unassuming, had always seemed like background furniture in our lives. But thinking back, he'd been present for nearly every major development in David's career, including the period when he began working with Katerina's organization. I arranged to meet Marcus at a coffee shop downtown, away from my protective detail. It wasn't difficult to slip away. The team was stretched thin, and I'd established a pattern of morning walks that gave me a reliable window of unsupervised movement. Marcus appeared nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I'm not sure what—" "I can tell you that would help," he began. David compartmentalized everything, especially the last few months. "I'm not looking for case information," I assured him. "Just trying to understand some personal matters." "Did David give you anything to hold for me before his arrest? Something he might have wanted returned when things settled down?" His eyes widened slightly. A subtle tell, but enough. "I don't think so." "Marcus," I leaned forward. "I need to know about the rings." The coffee cup stilled in his hands. "He said you might ask eventually. Said I should use my judgment about whether it was safe to tell you." "And what does your judgment tell?" "You?" He studied me carefully. "That you're caught between impossible choices, just like he was." He reached into his pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. "There's an address. The key is the date of your first date, formatted MMDDYY. He said you'd understand. What to do with what you find." The address led to a nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of town. Using the key code, our first date, as Marcus had indicated, I accessed a small climate-controlled unit containing a single safe. The combination, I discovered after several attempts, was the GPS coordinates of where David had proposed. Inside, the safe, our anniversary rings, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. "Sarah, if you're reading this, you've put the pieces together, as I always knew you would. The rings contain embedded storage with encryption keys that can only be accessed when paired. The USB drive holds compressed files of everything I've gathered: financial records, operational details, personnel identities, but it's locked without the keys from the rings. You now have 3 options. Take this evidence to authorities you trust implicitly. The organization will be dismantled, but their partners will likely retaliate against anyone involved in their exposure. We'd need new identities, permanently. Use it as leverage to negotiate directly with Katerina, securing financial compensation and safety guarantees. The evidence would remain unreleased but viable as ongoing insurance. Destroy it all, rings, drive, everything, and walk away completely. With nothing to fear from us, they'd likely leave you alone to rebuild your life. Though they'd ensure, I remain imprisoned to prevent future threats. I won't presume to guide your choice. I surrendered that right when I betrayed your trust. Whatever you decide, know that I accept the consequences as the price of my actions. Always. David. Back at the safe house, I studied the seemingly ordinary wedding bands. Under magnification, I could just make out the seams of the hidden compartments David had integrated into the design. Together, they were the key to unraveling an entire criminal network, or to securing my freedom from it. Detective Larson's gambling issues hadn't been mentioned again, but I'd noticed subtle changes in the protection arrangements. She was no longer left alone with me, and all operational discussions now included federal agents. Whether from genuine concern or abundance of caution, my safety had been entrusted to a broader circle. I'd scheduled a follow-up meeting with Katerina, ostensibly to accept her offer. The plan developed with law enforcement was straightforward. Engage her in detailed discussion of terms, get specific confessions about organizational activities, and provide enough evidence for immediate arrest. What they didn't know was that I carried the rings and USB drive with me, secured in a hidden pocket. What I didn't tell Katerina in our pre-meeting exchange was that I'd brought reinforcements. We met at an upscale hotel restaurant, her choice, designed to complicate surveillance efforts with background noise and multiple exits. She arrived early, already seated at a corner table when I entered. "You've decided to be practical," she observed as I sat down. "A wise choice." "I've decided to prioritize survival," I corrected. "Tell me more about how this works procedurally." She outlined the process. I would convince David to surrender his evidence and deactivate his dead man's switches. Once verified, the promised funds would transfer to my designated account. David's charges would be reduced through their law enforcement contact. "And this contact?" I prompted. "They're senior enough to ensure follow-through? Assistant District Attorney Reynolds has been accommodating for years," she replied with casual confidence. "Financial pressures create reliable partnerships." I nodded, asking clarifying questions about timing, verification methods, the extent of the evidence they believed David possessed. Each answer revealed more operational details, more names, more connections, all recorded by the wire I wore. "There's one aspect we haven't discussed," I said finally. "What happens if David refuses despite my efforts? Then alternative measures become necessary." Her expression remained pleasant, but her meaning was clear. "You just explained at length how elimination is inefficient and rarely authorized. For you, yes. David's situation is different. His continued resistance despite multiple opportunities for cooperation has exhausted normal protocols." I leaned back slightly. "So you'll have him killed in custody?" "We'll arrange for an unfortunate incident, yes. Prison environments present numerous opportunities for such occurrences. The confirmation of their willingness to murder David, spoken so matter-of-factly in a restaurant over sparkling water, was the final piece needed." "I think we're done here," I said quietly. Confusion flickered across her face. "We've barely started discussing implementation." "Federal agents, Ms. Petrova," I interrupted, using her real surname for the first time. "Table by the window, couple near the bar, businessman by the entrance. They've been recording every word." Her composure faltered for just a moment before she regained control. "A disappointingly predictable choice, Sarah, and ultimately futile. You've heard my contingencies." "I have," I agreed. "Which is why I'm not relying solely on law enforcement." I removed the rings and USB drive from my pocket, placing them on the table between us. "David's complete evidence package. The only existing copy accessible only with encryption keys embedded in these rings. Her eyes widened with genuine surprise. You found it. Then suspicion. How do I know these are genuine? The same way. I knew Ada Reynolds was your inside contact, David's meticulous record-keeping. I slid a printed page toward her, a transaction record showing payments to Reynolds' offshore account. Just one of thousands of documents these contain. For the first time, I saw calculation rather than confidence in her expression. What are you proposing? An alternative arrangement. You're arrested today for conspiracy, attempted witness tampering, and threat communication, charges solid enough for conviction but limited in scope. Your organization remains largely intact, with embarrassment rather than destruction. And in exchange, complete cessation of interest in me and David, permanent removal from your target lists, verified through channels I've established. He serves his current sentence without incidents, and I rebuild without interference. You're essentially offering minimal damage to both sides. I'm offering the only scenario where both of us walk away with something valuable. Your organization survives, David and I live. The federal agents were moving into position around the restaurant, still maintaining their cover but clearly preparing for arrest. If I refuse? She asked. Then I activate the dead man's switch David created, sending everything to every law enforcement agency simultaneously. Your entire network collapses by morning. She studied my face, searching for weakness or deception. Finding none, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Reasonable terms, I accept. Moments later, the agents converged, placing her under arrest. As they led her away, she glanced back at me with something approaching respect. You would have done well. In our organization, Sarah. Better than David. That's not the compliment you think it is, I replied. The aftermath unfolded over months rather than days. Katerina, whose real name was Ekaterina Volkova, received a 15-year sentence for the specific charges we'd agreed upon. The broader organization, as anticipated, survived with leadership changes and operational adjustments. True to our arrangement, they maintained distance from both David and me. The verification channels I'd established through Marcus showed no further surveillance or interference attempts. David served his sentence, reduced not through corrupt influence but through standard cooperation considerations, and was released after 4 years. By then, I had rebuilt my practice, restored my finances, and established a new normal that didn't include space for him. We met once after his release, at a neutral location, a park bench, not unlike the one where I'd negotiated, with Katerina years earlier. You outsmarted them all, he said, regarding me with a mixture of pride and regret. Found the perfect solution when everyone else saw only bad options. I did what was necessary, I replied. Nothing more. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd made different choices? If I'd come to you when things first started going wrong? I considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But hypotheticals don't change reality. And us? Is there any hypothetical where we find our way back? The directness of the question deserved equal honesty. No, David. Some betrayals can be understood, even forgiven eventually. But trust, once shattered so completely, doesn't reassemble into the same shape. He nodded, accepting this without argument. I never gave you enough credit for your strength. That was perhaps my first mistake among many. We parted with a formality that acknowledged our shared history without reopening it. I watched him walk, away, carrying the weight of consequences that would never fully lift. In the years that followed, I maintained the safety protocols that had become second nature. Regular sweeps for surveillance, secure communications, careful selection of associates. Not from paranoia, but from respect for the reality that agreements, like people, sometimes fail. The rings remained in my possession, their hidden contents intact but unused, insurance against a future that seemed increasingly unlikely to require it. Sometimes I would hold them, feeling their weight as a reminder of how quickly certainty can dissolve, how thoroughly lives can transform. I never wore mine again. Some symbols, once repurposed, can never return to their original meaning. But I kept them both, nestled in a small, fireproof box alongside David's letter and other artifacts from a life interrupted. Not out of sentimentality, but as evidence of survival. A reminder that even when every choice seems impossible, paths forward still exist for those willing to create them.